Chapter 13 of The Way to Willpower by Henry Hazlitt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. A Program of Work. Most of us live in the street of by and by. We honestly intend to do certain things, and for some strange reason, we keep on intending to do them. There is nothing especially difficult about them. They demand no gritting of teeth, no heroic sacrifice. They are simply not as pleasant as certain other things. They do not have to be done until a certain time, or perhaps there is no particular time at all which they have to be done. They can be done just as well tomorrow as today. So we put them off till tomorrow, that tragic tomorrow that never comes. We become members of what one writer has called the going-to family. We enlist in the army of procrastinators. The worst of it is that many of us do not look upon the doing of these numberless small tasks as anything requiring willpower at all, simply because they do not come in the teeth-gritting class. We intend to do them, and we are apt to think that our intention of doing them makes them as good as done. We are like the habitual cigarette smoker who tells you he could quit at any time. The thing has no hold on him. Only he doesn't want to quit. When we find that many of these little tasks are going by default, many of us, instead of blaming ourselves, indulge in a great deal of self-pity at our lack of time. But a few of us catch glimpses of the truth. We suspect that we are not as efficient as we might be. We may even suspect that our procrastination has something to do with lack of willpower. These two suspicions are correct. Aside from any moral benefit, it would be an untold blessing in itself if we could get these things done. If we had, for instance, a private secretary who would work for the mere honor of it and would not have even to receive instructions. I refer to such tasks as writing personal letters to friends, working off letters that you owe to people, paying bills, sending in your coupons to collect interest on a bond, taking a pair of shoes around to be half soled, or calling for a pair you left there, sorting out the old papers in your desk, bringing neatness out of chaos. I need not elaborate further. You have probably been already reminded unpleasantly of some concrete tasks. These tasks are not performed by intentions to perform them. The first requisite is to set a definite time for them, and to allow nothing to make you postpone that time. Instead of saying, I will have to write Fred. I really must write Fred. It's a shame how long I've been putting it off. You will say, I will write Fred next Tuesday. Or, I will write to Fred not later than next Tuesday. And you will keep a desk calendar or some other form of reminder, and your promise to yourself you will regard as sacred. Now, it may not make a great deal of difference to Fred whether he gets your letter next Tuesday or whether he does not get it until 2 weeks from next Tuesday. But it will make a great deal of difference to you. You will be disciplining yourself morally. You will be building up a will. Beware of curling your lip because these tasks are individually insignificant. The most imposing edifices that humanity has constructed, if I must be eloquent, have been built only by little brick on little brick. Moreover, you will find that these little tasks are getting themselves done. You will live a completer life, free from the ever-present preoccupation of tasks unfinished. And you will experience the peculiarly delightful gratification that comes from a sense of efficiency. Note that there is nothing rigid or brittle about such a program. You may not want to write Fred immediately after you get his letter, for you may not want the correspondence to be too frequent. But by marking a certain definite time, you can do what you had not previously done. A program of work may be laid out for the year, for the week, for the day, or for the hour. Or one program may be contained within the other. You should lay out your longest range program first, for that will define the direction and scope of your efforts. The nature of this long program will depend upon your ultimate purposes in life. Your aim may simply be general culture, but even in this instance, you will realize that haphazard reading is of little value, and you will draw up a list of books to be covered that year. Or you may decide that specialization would be more beneficial, and you may say to yourself, "For the following year, I will devote my evenings to the study of money and banking." Or you may decide that specialization would be more beneficial, and you may say to yourself, "For the following year, I will devote my evenings to the study of money and banking." Or you may decide to make it the history of English literature, or the appreciation of painting and a critical knowledge of the great masters. Having thus defined your efforts for the year so that you know exactly the goal to which you are heading, you may come directly to a plan for the week. You may decide that 2 or 3 hours should be given to your study or improvement on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday evenings. Or you may, if you think you have the willpower, allow for something turning up on one of those nights, and simply set aside any 4 evenings a week. I insert the phrase, "if you think you have the willpower," because this more elastic plan does, paradoxically, require more willpower than the more rigid program. On Monday and Tuesday, something is likely to turn up. You may be tempted to go to a moving picture, some friend may suggest bridge. And knowing that your program does not tie you down to Monday or Tuesday, you may accede. But you will find yourself paying for it heavily at the end of the week, and 4 evenings in succession, especially if they include Saturday evening, may strain your willpower to the breaking point. Moreover, in making engagements ahead, you are likely to overcommit yourself. "I suppose I could learn it just as well at home as by going to night school," you have often heard people say. "But I find that I can't study at home." Here is proof that home study requires more willpower than going to night school. Yet night school is far more rigid, both in its evenings a week and in its hours during those evenings, than home study could possibly be. It is precisely because of this rigidity that night school is easier to attend. But a further element must also be admitted. It is much easier to say to a friend, "I'm sorry, I'd like to go, but I have to go to night school," than it is to say, "I'm sorry, but I have to stay home and study." Your friend is likely to be skeptical. For some reason, he may be unable to see that an obligation to yourself is quite as sacred as an obligation to others. And once he finds that your program is elastic, your case is doomed. Study, if you must, on evenings when others would like to have you go out, but not when he would. This is his attitude, and it is going to take all your resources of tact to meet it. Moreover, the truth must be told. We are ashamed of having our friends discover that we are seeking self-improvement. That is why we shrink from confessing our real reasons. Your first tendency, doubtless, especially in drawing up any program of work or of little things to do in a single night, will be to plan too much. You will find yourself greatly underestimating the time it takes you to perform a particular task, or greatly overestimating the number of tasks you can perform. A program is valuable if for no other reason than that it brings out, as nothing else could, how you have been frittering away your time before you started to formulate programs. Even if you do not live up to your schedule, you will probably get more work done than you would have without one. But it is bad policy habitually to overplan. You may arrive at the point where you will not even expect to live up to your scheme. It is much easier for the discipline of willpower to plan modestly and to carry out your schedule than to plan greatly and fail. The first builds self-confidence. The second destroys it. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Daily Challenge. Willpower, in its highest sense, is associated with the Napoleons, the Robert Bruces, and the Luthers. We connect it either with great historic characters, men of action who have shaken the world, or with the noble and almost incredible sacrifices of the Christian martyrs. Willpower, in the heroic sense, is not dead. If anyone had ever thought so, he must have stopped believing so in 1914. Millions of men went forth to die for their faith, and 7 million dead on the battlefield are 7 million crushing answers to the cynic. If men will show such will for their country, they will show even more for the religious faith. Lest we forget the sacrifices of a former age, let me quote a few extracts from Taine's account, taken from Noailles, Fox, Neal, and other sources. Quote, In 3 years under Mary, nearly 300 persons, men, women, old and young, some all but children, allow themselves to be burned alive rather than abjure. "No one will be crowned," said one of them, "but they who fight like men. And he who endures to the end shall be saved." Dr. Rogers was burned first in the presence of his wife and 10 children, one at the breast. He had not been told beforehand and was sleeping soundly. The wife of the keeper of Newgate woke him and told him that he must burn that day. "Then," said he, "I need not trust my points." In the midst of the flames he did not seem to suffer. His children stood by consoling him in such a way that he looked as if they were conducting him to a merry marriage. Thomas Tompkins, a weaver of Shoreditch, being asked by Bishop Bonner if he could stand the fire well, bade him try it. Bonner took Tompkins by the fingers and held his hand directly over the flame to terrify him. But he never shrank till the veins and the sinews burst, and the water, blood, did spurt in Mr. Harpsfield's face. Bishop Hooper was burned 3 times over in a small fire of green wood. There was too little wood, and the wind turned aside the smoke. He cried out, "For God's love, good people, let me have more fire!" His legs and thighs were roasted. One of his hands fell off before he expired. He endured his 3/4 of an hour. Before him, in a box, was his pardon, on condition that he would retract. End quote. Such examples, with all their horror, are a mighty inspiration. They are examples of pure will. We do not know what part of the astounding achievements of Napoleon to assign to his will, and what part to the intellect which was its servant. The fortitude of these martyrs was a fortitude made possible by the will alone. But, however inspiring may be such examples, we must guard against connecting our conception of willpower too closely with them. If we place our conception of willpower too high, we are in danger of failing to recognize it in its humbler forms. The opportunity seldom comes when the will is put to such a test, or anything remotely approaching such a test. The writers of the magazine advertisements for the willpower courses conceive a man of willpower as a man who gets on, an E.H. Harriman or a J.P. Morgan, a dominant personality who must assume leadership and power, who bends others to his will or breaks them if they will not bend, who gets to his goal, if need be, over dead bodies, but who gets to his goal. This is an elevating conception, but the average man of talent is apt to find it a trifle unreal and beside the point after he has finished lesson 1 that evening and gone to work the next day. He is resolved to mow down all opposition, but when he gets to the office, he finds no opposition. Everybody says good morning, pleasantly, though a few wonder vaguely why he has set his jaw so tightly. If he is a bookkeeper, he goes to his ledger and finds the same columns of figures to add up, the same elusive discrepancies to straighten out. And you can't use willpower on figures, because they wouldn't understand it. You can only use willpower on persons. But if he is a sales clerk, he cannot dominate the customers. He must be pleasant and tactful. He might tell the floor walker what he really thought of him, and that might give satisfaction to the soul, but it would be of doubtful value in getting ahead in business. And even a bank or a railroad president meets day after day the same routine problems, many of which involve heavy responsibility, shrewd and mature judgment, and sometimes a good deal of thought, but hardly willpower. The need for willpower thus seems a distant need, which arises perhaps 1 day in 100, or 1 in 1,000. In fact, some people seem to feel that there are no outlets for willpower in this workaday world, unless you go out of your way to create them. This appears to be the opinion of no less a thinker than William James, who writes in his Psychology, quote, "Keep the faculty of effort alive in you by a little gratuitous exercise every day. That is, be systematically ascetic or heroic in little unnecessary points. Do every day or two something for no other reason than that you would rather not do it, so that when the hour of dire need draws nigh, it may find you not unnerved and untrained to stand the test. Asceticism of this sort is like the insurance which a man pays on his house and goods. The tax does him no good at the time, and possibly never brings a return. But if the fire does come, his having paid it will be his salvation from ruin. So with the man who has daily inured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in all unnecessary things. He will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him, and when his softer fellow mortals are winnowed like chaff in the blast." End quote. This is a noble passage, but I cannot accept James's implied view that daily life gives so few opportunities for the real exercise of will. Our whole modern journey from the incubator to the crematorium is taken in laps of 24 hours each divided sharply from the other, each with its routine much like the other, but each with its own challenge. And our way of meeting that challenge from day to day is our way of meeting the whole challenge of life. Every day we are faced with a challenge, sometimes large, often small, but it is always there if we but face it. We do not have to create it. We do not have to do unnecessary things. And if we meet it, we pay a premium for which we receive a return, and sometimes a handsome one, whether our house burned down or not. One test of whether you have met this challenge or not is in the way you feel at the end of the day. If you have met it, you will be rewarded with a glow of soul. If you have evaded or postponed it, your lot will be a sense of guilt. It may be ever so slight, but it will always be there, an uneasiness, like dirt in a corner. I have already mentioned the little daily duties that most of us put off or leave undone. But there are duties of a more serious sort, duties that require one not only to overcome laziness, but to surmount moral fear. Principal among these are unpleasant interviews. Let us take the very practical matter of asking for a raise. You think you are worth more money. You know you are. You have always known it. You have been waiting long enough for the boss to find it out, but the boss has proved either singularly stupid or singularly selfish, and you have determined either to enlighten him or to uplift him spiritually. Your mind is fully made up. But though your mind was made up a week ago, you haven't asked him yet, because on one day you had a mountain of work that had to be shoveled out of the way, and on the next you had been out late the night before and didn't feel equal to an interview, and on the next you didn't look very neat, and on the next you were waiting for some mistake of yours to blow over, and on the next the boss wasn't in a good mood. In fact, you will tell yourself anything except that you didn't have the courage. And yet, to put off such an interview when you have fully determined that it must be had is like putting off getting up in the morning, or putting off diving into cold water when you have gone down for a swim. The longer you stand at the diving board, the colder the water seems to get, the more terrifying becomes the height at which you are standing from it. There is a psychological theory that emotion follows action, not action emotion. That you do not run away from a bear because a fear seizes you, but that fear seizes you because you are running away. Whatever the truth there may be in this, it is certainly true that though you may hesitate because you fear to dive, you also fear to dive because you hesitate. And the like applies to interviewing the boss for an increase. Here, again, I do not suggest inflexibility. It is sometimes better to do a certain thing in the future, but if you really mean to do it at all, I insist upon fixing a definite time. Another challenge which is apt to occur once or twice in almost any day is the necessity for pronouncing that most difficult of all words for the tongue, no. A friend who has drifted from one job to another finally becomes a salesman for oil stock and wants you to invest in it. Another wants to borrow money. Another wants you to go into partnership with him. Another wants you to spend with him an evening that you have set aside for study. Another offers you a drink after you have signed the pledge. When you are with a young lady, a professional beggar, whom you privately suspect to be a fraud, an idler, and a parasite, perhaps better off than you are, asks for just a little silver change. the answer you would like to give in each case is no. Yet you fear to give offense. You fear to jeopardize your friendship. You fear a nasty retort. You fear having to defend your position. You fear embarrassment. Often, by refusing without unkindness, but with firmness and candor and tact, you can reduce giving offense to a minimum. But it is idle to imagine that you can altogether avoid it. That part which is altogether unavoidable must be faced courageously. A man cannot respect himself if he grants a request or gives money to a beggar, not because he believes the request is fair, or to relieve the beggar's distress, but simply because he cannot look his supplicant in the eye and tell him no. And the necessity for saying no is a daily necessity, an unpleasant duty that you do not have to go out of your way to find. To add to all this, as a daily exercise for willpower, there is always the infinitude of bad habits to be broken and of good habits to be formed. As a mere specific example, a cold shower every morning, if you are physically fitted for it, is an excellent will exercise, which more than pays for itself in its effects upon your health. End of chapter 14.